Did you know ASBN, America's Small Business Network, is now available on your TV? That's right. ASBN is now streaming on Roku, Apple TV, and Fire Stick, and available for download in the App Store. Scan the QR code to download the ASBN app today. Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.
Hey everyone, Jim Fitzpatrick. You're watching another edition of the Small Business Show exclusively right here at ASBN.com and now streaming on Roku, Fire TV, and Apple TV. Download the app today. On today's show, we are discussing the power behind a brand's identity. It's a logo, basically. So we're pleased to welcome Bill Harper, who's the CEO and Chief Creative Officer of BrandBoss HQ. Bill is giving us his perspective on how changing your brand's identity can be for the better or for the worse, depending on which way we're going here. So, Bill, thanks so much for joining us once again on the show.
Oh, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Bill, in your recent TikTok, you mentioned the logo change of the popular company Johnson & Johnson. Can you tell us more about that?
So yeah, this is a really interesting question, and it got a lot more attention on social media than I initially expected that it would. I made a post just sort of saying how I thought that it was a shift. Their logo is sort of steeped in history. It was based on an actual signature that had been put on one of the first checks. It was this really sort of de-branding move that has been happening, where somebody took something that had been a household recognized iconic logo,
right,
and decided to turn it into something that looks like anyone could have done it. Like there was no more pulse to it. It just was letters on a page. And it was really interesting the amount of attention that it sparked. But a brand is while a brand is much, much bigger than just a logo, the logo as a mark that precedes it, and especially one that's been around as long as the Johnson & Johnson logo has, just has incredible impact and recognition. And to make such a radical shift, even for just a division within the company, is a pretty significant change.
Yeah, there's no question about it. Why does a company typically decide to make a change in its branding and its logo to the consumer?
Well, it's interesting. I think for a lot of companies, when they make a change, they're either trying to show that they're no longer the company that they had been. And so there's some threshold that they're wanting to walk over. Either they've merged with somebody or they have taken a new stand in something that they didn't do before, and they want the world to know that they're not the same old thing. But a lot of times companies will do this when there isn't really a reason except just the feeling of doing something new. Tropicana did this over in the Pepsi Group a while back and just got handed a bunch of badness and to the tune of multi-million dollars that they lost in changing that iconic orange juice packaging with the orange with the straw punched through the middle of it.
I remember.
And when they went to that super generic look and feel, consumers were really turned off by that and they walked away from the brand. And yet every once in a while, we'll see a big brand like this that seemingly from the outside says, let's shake things up. There doesn't seem to be a huge reason for why they're doing it except to do it. And almost each time that has happened, it has yielded negative results. So I'm not entirely sure what they were trying to achieve with it. I have a funny feeling that they won't really gain a whole lot of positive traction from it. So time will tell.
Sure. We saw Dunkin' Donuts over the last couple of years change from Dunkin' Donuts to just Dunkin', which I think in that case, they wanted to be more than just donuts, right? Plus the fact that when you think about donut, you think about an unhealthy food. So you're like, I don't want to know if I want to go to a place that's got just donuts, right?
But I think the other thing that's interesting is Dunkin', when they made their switch, they stayed in the same vein. And that's not atypical at all. If you take a look at the evolution of Apple's logo, or you take a look at Shell Corporation or Starbucks or Dunkin', all of them are progressively simplifying their logo. They're taking extra syllables out of their name, or they're shortening, or they're simplifying their logos. And that's not at all unusual as brands become more iconic and more recognizable in a simple format. You don't need the swoosh and Nike at the same time. You just need the swoosh, or you just need Nike, etc. But this was a different thing. This was I think we're just going to throw out what was so recognizable and we're going to turn us into something that's very generic.
Yeah. Same thing we saw with Starbucks, where they had the Starbucks coffee around that iconic logo. I don't know if that was a mermaid or what that is in the center there.
It was,
but
yeah.
but then they just went with the mermaid, and they dropped the font and the lettering around, which was interesting. Right?
Absolutely. And frankly, they could go a step further with just the mermaid's eye in the middle and still get away with it. Like
Yeah.
that combination is so recognizable now and has become such a part of our pop culture and our familiarity that they could pretty much continue to simplify that down even more if they so desired. But again, that part is not atypical. That happens quite frequently.
How can companies ensure that their logo resonates with their target audience across various platforms? I mean, obviously, now everybody looks at 4 or 5 different screens, right? Between tablets and their TV and their phone and everything else, and their cars. And
Oh, you've asked a complex question. I think the easiest way to think about that is to create something that is solid and stable and will work in many varieties. Typically, a logo needs to work in a single color, black and white execution. It needs to work in 2 color, and it needs to work in 4 color, even with the advent of screens and the way that we use them, because it still needs to be possible to embroider it. It still needs to be possible to blow it up to large size, et cetera. If logos are busy, if logos are complicated to read, if logos don't scale well, each of those things can have a dramatic impact on our ability to recognize them or to see them used well. You'll see frequently when companies first come out, they'll have something that's very long and it doesn't work well on a website, or they'll have it stacked and it causes problems.
Right.
That's just not having thought through how the logo can work and be applied over several things. So there's a lot that goes into making them work right.
Yeah, for sure, for sure. Can you offer any advice for businesses that are looking to rebrand by changing their logos? What are some of the do's and don'ts?
Yeah, number one, make sure you're doing it for a good reason. If you don't have a good reason to do it and you're just doing it to freshen things up, go to the campaign and freshen that up instead. Leave the mark alone.
That's right.
Especially if it's one that it took a long time. See, the thing is, logos are the most emotional internal decision companies make where it comes to branding. They will allow a campaign to come and go, but the mark itself is something that people really, really struggle with. So make sure that you're changing it for the right reason and that there's an actual benefit to having changed it. 2, if you're going to make a change and you can stay in the same vein and iterate forward, that's better than making a radical shift unless the logo is busy or difficult to read or somehow feels dated. So there's just a couple of guideposts to sort of help along the path.
Yeah, for sure. There's companies out there now that are online that like Logo Tournament, I think is one of them, and it's some others, that if a company is looking to get different renditions of a logo design, they can just go online, I guess, put up like $300-400, and then these artists from all over the world bid on that, right? Design different logos, and then you've got a plethora. I've used them a couple of times in my entrepreneurial journey, and you've got tens of maybe 100 or so different logos to really look at to see which ones that you like. Have you ever used that, or have you ever seen that done?
No, we haven't. But what I can tell you is that you have to be very careful. There are a lot of people who claim that they can do logo design, but don't really understand what it is they're designing or how or why.
Right.
And of course, it's appealing for emerging businesses to want to spend as little as possible.
Yeah.
So rather than go and pay somebody who's a seasoned designer who's thinking through those things and has the experience to say, oh, if you make this choice, make sure to know that it's going to have this kind of impact
very good
on
point.
a color
Very
choice
good point.
or what have you. And so I think it's an easy way to check the box, but it's not always the best result in the whole wide world.
Yeah, you could be mad at yourself later, right? And actually,
Very
in one of
much
those
so.
cases, that did happen to me, where it was, geez, why did we go with this logo? Because it doesn't work on everything that we wanted it to work on, and that could have been, taken care of early on, right? So
Without a doubt.
and there's even like this whole psychology behind the colors that you choose for your logo to represent your brand, right? I mean, that's a whole
absolutely
nother
true.
show, but
Yeah, it's actually, there's a lot of theory behind color, but as simple as I can make it, the more primary they are, the more discount or retail they have a tendency to feel. If you think about Walmart or Dollar General or things like that, very primary colors, not a lot of gradient, not a lot of sophistication in the palette. As you move into the higher end, the Tiffany's, the Louis Vuittons, the rest of them, the palette tends to get a lot subtler, as does the font usage. And so there's sort of delicate balance to making sure that those things are working in harmony together to convey exactly what you want, which is either, hey, this is a discount thing, or this is a fast thing, or this is a stable thing, or this is an elegant thing.
Right.
And those cues that we've been taught our whole life by being consumers and bombarded really with messaging, those really drive a lot of the perceptions that we create based on what we see in a logo. So a logo has a lot of value, I think, a lot more than people have a tendency to give it credit for.
Yeah, I would agree. And it's funny you mentioned Tiffany. You've got that, I don't know what color box you would call that, right?
Tiffany blue.
Yeah. Can they actually trademark a color? Is that possible, or is that?
You can't trademark a color per se. You can trademark the use of a color. And this is where I'm stepping out of my zone because I am not an attorney for copyright. But there are certain limitations that you can do and can't do.
Okay.
How it's used, where it's used, and what ways it's used wind up becoming the nuances for those types of decisions.
Yeah, because that color that Tiffany uses, as soon as somebody sees that box, it's like, oh, wow, I got something really nice, right?
Well, and that's the thing that's interesting, right? Okay, perhaps you can use the color. The question is, do you want to be reminding people of a significant brand like Tiffany? I mean, imagine if a shoe company decided to use a blue box that was exactly the same as the Tiffany box, or even very close. People would be, are those Tiffany shoes? Like
exactly.
The brand has become so powerful. Again, you have to make some conscious decisions about, is that a good choice for us to do?
But I could buy a lesser expensive bracelet for my wife and put it in a Tiffany box. I'm allowed to do that, right?
Now I have a feeling she'll know.
I hope she's not watching this. I hope she's not watching this show right now, or I'm in trouble. Well, Bill Harper, CEO and Chief Creative Officer of BrandBoss HQ. This is why we love having you in, because you've got such great input and advice for all of our viewers. So thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
I appreciate it. Thanks so much, Jim. We'll talk again soon.
Thanks for joining us for another edition of The Small Business Show with Jim Fitzpatrick, exclusively on ASBN.com.